afternoon, and welcome to the first installment of Whirlwind Productions. This first show is dedicated to Jesus Christ. And I dedicate this to Jesus Christ because He is responsible for me even being alive right now to tell this story. And those who I've told it to in the past have been very inspired by the story that I told. And I know it's my obligation to spread the truth of His existence to the world. And it's one of the purposes that He has sent me back here for. When I was 21 years old, I had a very bad biking accident. And in this accident, I was taken up in the presence of Jesus. The way it happened was I was in the park and I was very depressed because at 21, I was contemplating Islam. I've been born Christian and raised Christian and baptized in the Christian church. But during this time, I was exposed to Islam during my college years. I had returned home, dropped out, and I was very depressed. And it was very important to me to know what God was real. Who should I really worship? That was a very important issue for me, and I was very, very, very depressed and torn. Very depressed and contemplative. And I was riding my bike in the opposite direction of traffic. I'm not going to get too much into the details of the accident because I really was told after the fact what happened. I don't recall any of the events happening. But what I do remember is being surrounded by, I would say, maybe 30, or 25 to 30 small, tiny lights. Like, they were so bright, they were like pieces of the sun. And in addition to their brightness, I could sense energy from them, an extremely loving energy. The only thing that I could do in their presence was moan and groan because it just felt so good to be in their presence. And they surrounded me and they took me up, and I went past the planets, and we began to go to the sun. And one of the things that I noticed about being outside of my body, which it's obvious that I was outside of my body because I could sense that I was no longer thinking with my mind or seeing with my eyes, that all of those things were emanating from my solar plex. And the only thing that I could do in the presence of those lights was just groan because they were just so full of love. They weren't saying anything to me or communicating anything to me, but the only thing that I knew was the loving feeling that they gave me. And so as we began our journey to the sun outside of your body does not burn you. It's like the sun is pure love. It's pure love. Like so much so that, like I said, in the presence of that light, all you can do is groan and moan. And that's all I was able to do. So these lights took me through the sun. And once we went through the sun, it's as if nothing negative could exist anymore in that place. Once we went through the sun, nothing negative could exist, because I tried to think about worry, and it just popped out of my mind as if nothing negative could exist there. And I tried to think again, like, what was I thinking about? I tried to think about fear. It just popped out of my mind again. And it was obvious to me that in this place, nothing negative could exist. It's a place of pure positivity. And once we had gotten through the sun, we began to move what I perceived as the speed of light. So fast, we were going through galaxies. And it was like zzz, and we'd be in another galaxy. Zzz, in another galaxy. Zzz, in another galaxy. Until we had traveled some time, and I began to sense that the love that I felt from the sun and from these lights, tiny lights, there was another source of it. They were not the source of that loving feeling. After we had traveled some time, I could see a giant figure off in the distance. There was a throne and a giant figure on that throne. And as we began to come closer, I began to realize that this was Jesus in this throne. He was a giant. It had to be at least 6 or 7 stories high, the throne itself. And he was a giant that filled up the throne, about 6 or 7 stories high or tall. Once I began to get nearer to him, I began to understand that he was the source of that love. He was the source of that was the cause of that groaning and moaning. And the closer I got to him, the more that feeling of just pure love emanated from him. These lights put me down at his feet, and all I could do was stare at him. He was so beautiful and just gave a feeling of so much love that all I wanted to do was just grab his foot and just really just kiss him. I wanted to be attached to him. You know, I just wanted to touch him. And he took me up in his hands, in one of his hands, his right hand, which was a giant hand, and he brought me up to, he began to speak to me as if he was saying so many words that he couldn't like say them all at once. It was just a buzzing noise or sound that he was communicating with me on, like zzz is what it sounded like buzzing, zzz, like a downloading. And as he was speaking to me like this, I began to feel as though I knew everything. Like all the worries that I had, everything that I thought was important in the world, or it was unimportant. And I began to say in my spirit, oh, I understand. Then, after he had spoken to me a while, he put me down near his feet. And at his feet, there were these elder people. They were all elderly, but they were beautiful and strong. They didn't have wrinkles on their faces. Their skin was like the skin of babies. It was like their skin was so smooth and glowing, and each one of them had pure white hair. The men, beards and hair on their heads, it was all white, pure white than I can remember seeing anywhere else on anyone else's head. All right, and they were beautiful, and they were strong, and they all communicated with me in a way. It seemed like telepathy. Like I could hear them and see them all from my solar plexus. Like it's like my head didn't exist. Like those senses of sight and hearing and thinking and feeling were all based out of my solar plex. And they would all talk to me, and they talked as if they were one, like water. Their voices was like water, because they said the same thing at the same time. We love you. We miss you. You are our family. And I began to feel that sense of love again. They began to come closer to me and encircle me. And one particular beautiful woman came the closest to me. And she was just welcoming me and telling me that, they loved me. And the strange thing is that even though they all spoke as one, you could hear each individual's voice. It was like you could distinguish each individual, although they spoke like water. It was clear that they were specific individuals. But this particular beautiful woman, she came the closest to me. And I began to notice that they had on gowns, these beautiful gowns. All of them had these beautiful, exceptional gowns. And the gowns were like no material I had ever seen before, because they seemed to be alive. The gowns itself seemed to be alive. Like the only thing I could describe how they looked was like liquid pearl. The gowns looked like liquid pearl, and they would move and cover them as if they had a consciousness. There was no wind that I could sense there, but the gowns, like I said, as they moved, the gowns moved independently, covering the parts of their bodies that needed to be covered, and just intelligent. Seemed to be an intelligence to the gowns. And as she came closer to me, she came the closest to me where I could see her face and the details of her face. She's a very beautiful, beautiful older woman. It's like these people had to be like 80 and above, but they were wrinkle-free. Their skin were like baby skin, and they were just so beautiful, and all of them had pure white hair with these pure liquid pearl gowns. And I became fixated on the gowns. And as she came closer to me, I asked her, are these gowns alive? Are they living entities? And as I asked that question, Jesus picked me up in his hand again. I remember that was one of the most heartbreaking moments of my life, that I ever experienced, because I knew he was taking me away. And I just remember yelling, no, 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 please no. And he lifted me up, and his words to me were kind of strange because they made me say to myself, I didn't know Jesus knew the word okay, because okay seemed like such a modern word. But he said to me, don't worry, everything is going to be okay. Everything is going to be okay. And he just continued to echo that to me. Don't worry, everything is going to be okay. Everything is going to be okay, as he took me up in his hand. And I began to calm down. And as I began to come to, I could hear my mother praying above me, and her teardrops dropping in my face, and woke me up. And I woke up in the hospital bed. And I remember reaching my hand out and touching something far away from my head and squeezing it. And at that point, I was in pain, like, ah, and I realized it was my eye. My eye had swollen up that tremendously that it was so far outside of my head. And as I touched it, I began to feel extreme pain. I could hear the doctors talking to my mom shortly after that, telling her, there's nothing we can do with it now. Bring him back in 3 days and we'll see if we can take it out. I'm thinking to myself, this man is talking about my eye. Take it out. But obviously it was that badly damaged that they felt that they would have to take it out. It was huge. I looked like a mutant. And I remember one day went by and the swelling had gone down very significantly. On the next day, just the second day, it had gone down completely. And the only things that I had were 2 black eyes, but they were both of the same level. And the third day when I went back to the doctor, they were astounded. I remember them saying, wow, his eye has almost completely healed. On the third day, and that was very significant to me, the third day. And I never had any more problems from that eye again. I told my mom about the incident and the vision, and I forgot about it for some years until I saw a program about near-death experiences, and it was one of the most compelling stories, they said, because it was from a 3 or 4-year-old little girl who had a near-death experience, and they asked her to draw what it is she saw, and she drew a giant in a throne in the midst of the stars, and that brought all of that back to remembrance for me. And I just feel humbled and grateful and blessed to have had that experience, and the experiences that were to come after that. And for years I never really shared this story to many people. Few people that I felt really needed to hear it. I just didn't really want the notoriety, because some of the things that he filled in my mind made me feel like most of the churches that I had gone to weren't of that true spirit. And so I never really went to a church and told the story. Once at my mother's church, I did tell the story. But I felt, after having been convinced by a friend to tell the story to a group of prayer partners, he told me about the impact that it had on many people. And I just knew that I had to tell the story to people so that they might be inspired, and so that they might know that there is a real Jesus, and he really exists. He's really there, and he really is just great and special. And he is sitting in a throne in heaven with who I perceive now to be the saints. I might be wrong, but that's who I believe they were. And things that have happened since then, miraculous things, that I will articulate at some point during another show. Thank you for listening. I hope that this inspires people to realize that Jesus, Yahweh Mashiach, is real, and he's there. Upon reviewing the first presentation of Whirlwind Production, I felt I needed to clarify a few points to my new audience. Firstly, this presentation was not scripted. It was completed in one session and was spoken directly from my heart and memory. It was the story of true events, and told from the perspective of a young man in search of himself and the God he was to serve. Though I mentioned other belief systems, it was not meant as a negative indictment of those with differing belief systems. Each of us must work out our own salvation with fear and trembling. I now know and believe that if you sincerely seek, you will find your God and purpose. In these dark times, I know the Most High is still in charge, and his mind is above anything that mere men can conceive. Lastly, let me say that not only was this story meant to inspire, but to encourage those who believe to continue to believe, no matter what you hear or see in these evil times. Stay close and hold God's hand. Trust and believe in His Son, Jesus Christ. The Holy Spirit, Spirit of truth, with constant prayer and study of the Word to show ourselves approved. His Word rightly prophesies what we will soon face and serve as a guidepost for His children to be more like Him and to come through our troubles and find our way back home to Him in the end. I am by far an imperfect man, and I need Him daily to hold my hand and to give me His infinite grace, mercy, peace, and strength. I hope that my story encourages many of His children to continue in faith and in holding His hand in prayer. For His continued love, mercy, and grace upon ourselves, families, and households. May His favor and blessing and protection surround us all. Family of God, if you enjoyed this first show, don't forget to share, like, and subscribe. Those who would like to contribute to the growth and development of Whirlwind Productions can do so at $redtail777. That's $redtail, REDTAIL 777. God provides for His children, and anything you choose to contribute will be greatly appreciated. Thank you, and God bless you all.